right, tonight we want to get started really fast in chapter 11 and verse 19. Now, chapters 10 and 11, the key words are Cornelius. And the latter part here of chapter 11 is going to be some other things, but we'll use Cornelius as our key word. Now, in chapter 11, the first 18 verses is Cornelius, and the unique thing about Cornelius is he was the first Gentile, uncircumcised Gentile, brought into the church. Now, the remaining part of this chapter from 19 on is going to be talking about the Gentiles, going to be talking about converting Gentiles en masse, many, many Gentiles. Now, notice what it says here in verse 19. They therefore that were scattered abroad upon the tribulation that arose about Stephen. What chapter would that be in? Chapter 8. Go back to chapter 8, first 4 verses. The church was scattered abroad. Now those people who were scattered abroad, then they traveled as far as Phoenicia and Cyprus and Antioch, speaking the word to none save only the Jews. Why would they be doing that? Silly question, isn't it? That's what they were all doing until Peter was called, went up, and converted that Gentile. Then in verse 20, but there were some of them, men of Cyprus. Now, I suppose that they probably heard about Peter. I don't know whether they had or whether they jumped the gun and they were right in doing it. But it said, there were some of them, men of Cyprus and Cyrene, who when they were come to Antioch spake unto the Greeks also, preaching the Lord Jesus. So, let's now put this in perspective. We go back here and we'll take a look at the map, and let's follow Paul around now. He leaves Jerusalem, he goes up where? Damascus, Arabia, back to Damascus, back down to Jerusalem. How many years is that trip right there? 3 years. Then he leaves Jerusalem, and where does he go then? He goes up to Caesarea, and from Caesarea on up to Tarsus. That's right. He's going to be up at Tarsus up there for about a year before he moves on then. Now, if we look at the travels of Peter, Peter takes off from Jerusalem. Where does he go? Down to Lydda. Then where? Up to Joppa. Then where? Up to Caesarea. Converts Cornelius. And then goes back down to Jerusalem. And he has to face the people down there and tell them why he did what he did up there. By the way, if I ask you for all of the travels of Peter, what else would you give me in addition to this? Peter's been out of town, so what would you say? Start running through. When did Peter leave Jerusalem? What? No. Samaria. You remember Philip went up to Samaria? And then Peter and John went up to Samaria, laid their hands on the people, and then went back down. So he'd go up to Samaria, then he would have come back down there if we ask for all of them. Now, we get down to this point right in here, and at this point, thank you, Kim, at this point, it says they traveled as far as Phoenicia and Cyprus and Antioch. So now, let's get used to a new map. This map is in the upper part there, and I really can't find any maps. I've got about 150 maps and can't find any that's got the whole thing in a big section that's in there. But as we look at it, down there is Jerusalem, up there is Tarsus, over there is Antioch, and there is Phoenicia, where I've drawn that little line around. That's the border of Phoenicia, and then over there is Cyprus. So where those yellow dots are, that's where these guys were preaching. That's what we're mentioning right here in verse 19. If we look at another map, just a little bit differently there, down there is Jerusalem, up there is Tarsus, over there is Antioch, down there is Phoenicia, and over there is Cyprus. So it's in this area in here that these people are going up and starting to preach up there around Cyprus and Antioch and Phoenicia in those particular areas there. Now, if we put it all around there just a little bit better and draw the map out in here, down in here is where Canaan would be. See, up here's the Sea of Galilee, down here's the Dead Sea, So Canaan now is just in this little section right in here. As you go up to this bump up here, what mountain would that be right in there? Okay, Mount Carmel, right in there. Now then you go on up, and we get into Phoenicia, and we're going on up and around. And so it shows here the sea of the Mediterranean Sea, and it's the coastline of that. So as we look at it now, down here is Jerusalem. Up there is Tarsus, where Paul is right now. And then over here is Antioch. Now, Antioch is going to be a very, very important city. So I want us to get this picture of where it is. And down there is Phoenicia, in that area that's right in there. And then over in there is Cyprus. So you can see the whole thing then as you put it together in there. One more map of a different kind. It gives you mountain ranges and so forth. Down here would be Jerusalem, and up there would be Tarsus, on up around the Mediterranean Sea, and then up here is Antioch, and then down here is Phoenicia in there, and over in there is the island of Cyprus then, as you look at it. I think I have one more map here that we'll be using quite a lot as we go through, but now down here is Jerusalem, over here is Cyprus, here is Phoenicia, up here is Tarsus, and now there is Antioch that is there. That's important because Paul's going to take off and make his missionary journeys from Antioch. In other words, Antioch is now going to become the headquarters as we get into chapter 13. You remember as we started out, I said the first 12 chapters there are about what apostle is the major apostle in the first 12 chapters? Peter. What city is the major city? Jerusalem. And what people? The Jews. Then when you get into chapter 13, now then, who's going to be the major apostle? Paul. The major people? Gentiles. And the major city? Antioch. So we're getting ready to shift up in there to Antioch. And that's why I've thrown all these up there for us tonight to kind of get a picture then in what we're doing in there. Now, Antioch then, a very, very important city, and we'll see why now as we start out. All right, it says here then in verse 21, "And the hand of the Lord was with them, and a great number that believed turned to the Lord." So, notice here how it puts it this way, that a great number that believed. Now, why was believing such an important thing? A great number that believed turned to the Lord. What was it? What was the sermon that they preached? What was the one thing that they had to tell the whole world? That Jesus is the Christ. See? And they preached that same sermon. Remember Peter's sermon? That the Christ would come and he would suffer and God would raise him. He'd be exalted in there. And then this Jesus. Now, that's the big thing. As many as believed that doctrine, as many as convinced then of that, they then turned to the Lord. They turned from their way and turned to him. Now, 22. "And the report concerning them came to the ears of the church which was in Jerusalem." All right, so this report about the people up at Antioch receiving the Lord, so many of them, so many Gentiles, that report came down to the ears of the church. How can a church hear? How can a church have ears? It's made of people, isn't it? See, the church is the people. It's not the building. And so the church, the people down in Jerusalem, heard this, and they sent forth Barnabas as far as Antioch. So they told Barnabas, "You go up to Antioch now and help those people up there." Now, if we go back, what chapter would we pick Barnabas up in? If we go back and say, okay, now where did we first meet Barnabas? So let's go through. 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 4, 4. Okay. Down at the end of chapter 4, we run across Barnabas. And what was it that he did? How were we introduced to him? He sold his property and he gave it. in contrast to chapter 5. What's in chapter 5? Ananias and Sapphira, who then tried to mimic, only they kept back part of the price. Okay, so we met Barnabas back there. Now, they changed his name to Barnabas because, why? What was he? He was an encourager. He was an exhorter. He was somebody that could build you up. He wasn't just somebody to give you facts. He wasn't just somebody to prove a point. But he was somebody to encourage you, build you up, make you want to serve the Lord. Now, why would they need that kind of a preacher up in Antioch? That up there, they've got Gentiles, haven't they? And these Gentiles, for the first time, is believing that Jesus is the Christ. Have you ever tried to put yourself in the shoes of these people? Because, let's say Sunday, somebody comes down here, let's say 6 people. They come in, and they obey the gospel. They become Christians. And we ask them, do you believe that Jesus is the Christ? And they say, yeah. Now, how big a deal is that? Now, I know we take their confession the way they did back then, but how big a deal is that in our culture? When these people come up and say, I want to become a Christian, how many of you think, I wonder if they believe in Jesus? How many of you think that? How many of you might think, I wonder if they know what the church is? Hold up your hand. Yeah. Now you start thinking, I wonder if they understand. I wonder if they understand the kingdom. But Jesus is the Christ. In America today, that's what the vast majority of people believe, isn't it? And so when people say, I believe Jesus is the Christ, we don't go, oh. But let's take the city of Antioch. Those people that said, I believe Jesus is the Christ, how unique were they? How different were they? How strange were they? They were weirdos in the eyes of all the people. Who else in town believed that Jesus was the Christ? Nobody. Nobody. Only those that were baptized into Christ. Why would I say that? Because today, there are a lot of people who believe Jesus is the Christ, but they're not baptized into Christ. But back then, the people that believed Jesus was the Christ, they were baptized. And the other people didn't believe it. Now, as these preachers went into Antioch, before they went in, the day before they went in, how many people in Antioch believed that Jesus was the Christ? Let's think about the city. Nobody. What did they believe? 100% of them. In some gods, Roman gods. See, 100% of them. And so these guys come in and they preach Jesus is the Christ, and as many as believed turned to the Lord. And so this was a big thing. It was a strange thing. They were different. They needed encouragement. They needed encouragement. The only way I can put it is, suppose that somebody comes in here tonight and converts us that Timothy McVeigh is the Son of God. And he's getting ready to die next month down in Oklahoma for our sins. And we believe that. Now, when you go out tomorrow, are you going to be strange in this community? Think about what you would be. How many of us would believe that tomorrow? Just those of us that's here. As we go out into the community, what's going to happen to you when you go out and you tell your neighbor, say, you know what I believe? You know what I heard? Timothy McVeigh is divine. What kind of reception are you going to get? That's the closest I could put us into a situation of what they had back in those days. Because remember, when they said Jesus is the Christ, Jesus of Nazareth, how did Jesus of Nazareth die? As a criminal, didn't he? The Roman government put him to death, just like they're going to put Timothy McVeigh to death. Now, when the government puts you to death, is that a good sign or a bad sign? See? And so, we just can't put ourselves in their shoes. unless you do something like I've done there, and then you just say, I just can't imagine it. So Barnabas is going up there to encourage them now, build them up, stay faithful. Okay, it says in verse 23, who when he was come and had seen the grace of God. How do you see the grace of God? Have you ever seen grace? We talk about the grace of God. Have you ever seen grace? What did it look like? He went up there and he saw the grace of God. Have you ever seen love? Ever seen what does love look like? Does it have a tail? What does love look like? Now, what does it mean? He saw the grace of God. Okay, he saw the effect, didn't he, of the grace of God. All these people are saved by the grace of God, are they not? All of us are saved by the grace of God, are we not? In other words, it means we don't deserve to be saved, but by God's grace, He has a plan to save us. Now, if next week we come in here, and this building is full, and we've got 200 people, and they're sitting on the floor around here, and I say, look at the grace of God. See? Or I could say, look at the effects of the gospel. Look at what God has done. So it's talking about the effect of those people. When he saw that, he saw what God had done for those people. So he goes up there and he sees the grace of God, and he was glad, and he did what to them? Just what you would expect. He exhorted them. So the great exhorter exhorted them. And what did he exhort them about? That with purpose of heart they would cleave unto the Lord. So you could summarize his lessons in that one thing. Here's what I'm going to do. Sometimes I preach a series of lessons. Fruit of the Spirit. I preach, 8, 10 lessons? Fruit of the Spirit. But each one of them, the fruit of the Spirit. Now, when Barnabas was up there, he was exhorting them, and what was the one thing that covered it all? What was it he had in mind? What was he trying to accomplish, see? And he exhorted them that with purpose of heart, set your heart to cleave unto the Lord. Now, is that necessary to exhort somebody to do that? Or is cleaving unto the Lord just a natural, normal thing? No, it's not a natural thing. You have to purpose in your heart. You have to purpose in your heart. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to cleave unto the Lord. And that's why a lot of times people are converted, and then they just immediately fall away. They thought it sounded good. They want to be saved. But they hadn't purposed in their heart. They hadn't determined in their heart. They hadn't set their heart so that they were ready to do something. In whatever you do that's worthwhile, you have to set your heart, don't you? How many of you in here enjoy getting up at 5 or 6 in the morning and hitting the highway to go to work? Hands. Boy. How many of you go to work? Oh, yeah, a lot of you go to work. Well, why do you go to work if you don't want to go to work? I don't. Why do you drive all that way? You purposed in your heart, haven't you? No, this is my job. I'm to be there at 8 o'clock or whatever time it is. I have so many miles to drive, and I'm going to get up at 5, and I will do it. And you purpose in your heart. Nobody likes that. Nobody enjoys that. But you're always there on time. And why are you there? Because you purpose in your heart. You see, to do that. You think about it. You know what it takes. You know how long it takes to drive from here to there. And you figured it out. And you start. That's purposing in your heart. And so it is with the Lord. We purpose in our heart to cleave unto the Lord. whatever else may come. My kids may forsake me. My wife may leave me. The government may put me in jail. I don't know what will happen, but there's one thing in life that I have determined I will do. That's what Barnabas was saying. Cleave unto the Lord. Set your heart, is what it says Ezra did. Set his heart. And so it's always been that way, that we've got to set that heart. So that's what that exhorting was about. And so he was exhorting them to set your heart to cleave to the Lord. For he was a good man and full of the Holy Spirit and of faith. So Barnabas was a good guy. And much people were added unto the Lord. So there were lots of people added to the Lord as a result of their teaching and preaching then that's up there. So now at Antioch, we have a huge Gentile population. This is a Gentile city, and the vast majority of the people there are Gentiles, and now we've got a large church up at Antioch composed of Gentiles. Now, look in verse 25. And he went forth to Tarsus to seek for Saul. And when he had found him, he brought him unto Antioch. So now he knows Saul's up at Tarsus. He knows he needs help. So he runs up to Tarsus, gets Saul, brings him back down, and now Saul is down there to help him. And it came to pass that even for a whole year they were gathered together with the church and taught much people. And the disciples were called Christians first in Antioch. So Paul and Barnabas stayed there for a whole year, teaching these people, grounding these people, exhorting these people. Purpose in your heart. Cleave to the Lord for a whole year. And at that place, Christians were first called, the disciples were first called Christians in Antioch. Now, what does disciple mean? A learner. It means a learner is really what it means. Now, it's more than a learner. It really is just, it's more than a learner. I hope that you learn from me every once in a while. But you are not my disciples. And if I could teach you the book of Acts so that everybody in here did what we try to do, can't ask any question that you can't answer, you know all of these things, I've done a pretty good job of teaching. And you've done an awfully good job of learning. But you're not my disciples. You're the disciples of whom? Christ. Now, the difference is this, that what I am taking you and teaching you is not something that originated from me. I'm not teaching you Williams-isms. I'm not teaching you some deep thought that I thought up today. I'm not teaching you a set of doctrines or principles that I've figured out in this life. Everything I'm teaching you, I've taken from another source. It's from Jesus Christ. Now, when Socrates taught, or Plato, those men, they would go out, they would figure out, sit under a tree, think about what life was about. They'd come up with some idea. They'd try to work this thing out. Then they'd come into town, and these smartest ones, half a dozen smart guys, they could come into town and say, now, let's figure out what life is all about. So you figure it out, you say, you know, I think Plato has it put together. So you start following Plato. And you're learning Plato's philosophy. You're his disciple. You think Socrates has it. You follow him. You're Socrates' disciple. Rabbis in the Jewish religion, they came and they would gather together disciples that would learn after them. Now, Jesus came and Jesus began to teach, and these people are following their rabbi. They follow him up on the Mount of Beatitudes. And they sat down, and their rabbi said, "Blessed be." He starts teaching them. And he starts telling them in the Sermon on the Mount, you've heard it said by these other rabbis that this is what you're to do. But I say unto you that here we're supposed to go back and follow Moses. And so they were his disciples. You're a disciple of the man that you follow, and you try to imbibe his spirit. You try to imbibe his doctrine. You try to eat everything about him so that you become like him. Now, all followers of Christ are disciples of Christ. We want to learn his philosophy. We want to learn his teaching. We want to learn his attitude. We want to be like him. So we're disciples. Now, the disciples were first called Christians. What does Christian mean? It's Christ and ion. The word means pertaining to Christ. That's what it means. Pertaining to Christ. These are people that pertained to Christ. They were associated with him. They were connected to him. They were disciples that had imbibed his spirit, and they lived like him. You could describe their lives. If you wanted to describe the life of a true disciple, what one word could you use to describe that disciple's life? Christ. Paul, remember, said in Galatians, it is no longer I who live. He said, I've crucified the flesh, so it's no longer I who live, but it's Christ who liveth in me. That's Christian. One that pertains to Christ. Now, they were first called Christians in Antioch. The interesting thing about this word, called, is every other time it's used in a sense of where God calls. It's a divine calling. And so, evidently here, that God saw fit at this place to have his people take on the name Christian. And so that name first came into existence. They were called Christians here by God in the city of Antioch. It's an interesting thing. It's a Gentile church too, isn't it? See? That's there. Okay. Now then, verse 27. Now in these days there came down prophets from Jerusalem unto Antioch, and there stood up one of them named Agabus, and signified, he's going to talk in sign languages here, he signifies by the Spirit, that there should be a great famine over all the world, which came to pass in the days of Claudius. Now, he comes up and he tells about this great famine. All right, now, in that timeline that you've got there, out here, I've got marked right there where Herod Agrippa dies, and he's going to die right here in the next chapter, here in 44 A.D. Now, on this timeline, they don't have this little thing up here about Claudius. But this is one way that you can tell the times in the book of Acts. Archaeologists dug up and found the evidence when this famine came to pass. This famine happened in 44 A.D. when Claudius was emperor. And so that's how they know that that's where we are right now. Okay, now there's going to be a big famine. 29. And the disciples, that's the ones at Antioch, every man according to his ability, determined to send relief unto the brethren that dwelt in Judea. Why would they do that? Somebody came up here tonight and said, there's going to be a famine over all the United States. Why would we say, we need to really dig down and every one of us give as much as we can and send to the brethren in Oregon? Or if you don't want Oregon, Pennsylvania. Or you name it. Is that what we would do? If a prophet came in and told us there's going to be a famine in the whole world, Would we take up a collection to send it somewhere? We wouldn't, would we? The reason why is that, yeah, they'd be hurt, but we'd be hurt. And if I said, well, let's take up let's everybody give all you can give, and we're going to send it to Oregon, what would you ask me? Why? Well, those brethren down there will be hurting. Why? There's going to be a famine. Well, so what? There's going to be a famine everywhere. I wouldn't have any answer to you. Let me ask you. Just like that, snap of a finger. They said, we need to take up a collection and send it to the brethren in Judea. And there was no argument. Why did they know those brethren in Judea needed help to get through this famine that's coming? Where do those brethren come from in Judea? Where's the first church? It was in Jerusalem, wasn't it? And when Saul came along and he scattered the church, and they went out, every disciple, and established churches out there. Most of them would be in Judea, wouldn't it? If we got run out of town here, most of us would settle somewhere, you see, in the state of Washington. All right? Now, what about those brethren before they were run out of town? What had happened to all those Christians in Jerusalem? You remember what they had to do? Sell their land. They had to suffer. They were in deep poverty, taking care of these people. And then, just as that was coming to an end, now then, they're driven out of town. What would happen to you if all of a sudden we put up a plea, we've got so many people out here to take care of, and you empty your bank account, you give the church all the money that you can possibly give, and then all of a sudden, persecution comes and you're driven out of your home. Would that affect your job? Yeah, you're driven away from home. You don't have a home. You don't have a job. And so you scatter out and you go out in some town and you rent an apartment or pitch a tent and go out and get you a job. And then all of a sudden, a big famine hits. What's going to happen to you? You're going to be the one to lose your job, aren't you? It's going to be terrible. So they know the situation of those brethren, and so they said, let's send the money down to relieve their needs right now. It said, which also they did, sending it to the elders by the hand of Barnabas and Saul. So they chose Barnabas and Saul and said, you take this money, you go down to Judea and go around and pass out this money to the churches in Judea. Now, why would they choose Barnabas and Saul? Especially Barnabas. He's a hero down there, isn't he? I mean, down in Judea, that's where he came from. He had sold his land. Everybody loved him down there. The church at Jerusalem had sent him up there for exhortation. So we're going to send a man down who knows the situation. He's from the country. He knows what is going on down there. So they send it then down to the elders. Now, when they send it to the elders, we haven't run across the elders before, have we? No, we haven't run across any elders yet. Later on, we'll run across some elders, find out how to get them and so forth. But they did have elders in the church there. And so they sent it to the elders. Why would they send it to the elders? If, suppose Washington had this great big disaster and Oklahoma sends $1 million up here to the state of Washington, why would they send up and drop off several thousand down at Renton and come up here and call Steve and I together and drop off several thousand up here and then go on? Why would they do that? We would know the need. That's better than the people from Oklahoma coming up here and trying to figure out the needs and so forth. We would understand. So they then did that, and so then we'd take care then of the need this year. Okay, now that's in 44 A.D. Now about that time, about the same time, Herod the king put forth his hand to afflict certain of the church. Now then, here it is. Let's look at a little map about Herod. here we've got Herod the Great. Now, Herod the Great, one of the meanest men that ever lived. And he died 2 years after Jesus was born. Now, he's the one that went over and had the little babies in Bethlehem killed. And then he died. Now then, you take his wives, and he had 10 of them stretched out through there. And so you take his wives, and they had some children. And that one down there is the one that cut off Philip's head. And he's called Herod. This one down here is called Herod. And he's the one that Jesus said, you go tell that old fox. And then over here, this is the one that we're running into right now. This is his son that is right there. See? He's the one that's getting ready to kill James. Now, he will have a boy, which will be the grandson of Herod the Great. We'll run across him clear down to the end of Acts. But we've got 3 sons of Herod, and they're all called Herod. And so when they talk about Herod this, Herod that, it's hard to keep them in there. We generally think about Herod the Great and so forth. But Herod the Great died after Jesus was born. His 3 boys were sent out. They ruled different areas out there, so we run across them. Okay, this is the Herod right here then. Now, he put forth his hand to afflict certain of the church, and he killed James, the brother of John, with the sword. So now, he's the king, and so he kills James with the sword. Now, in our last persecution, was back in chapter, where? The last persecution when the church was scattered abroad. In chapter 8, there, Saul is the guy, and now Saul killed whom? He left certain people alone, and he persecuted others. Who was he persecuted? The people. And all the apostles stayed in Jerusalem. You remember that? Everybody in Jerusalem was run out of town except the apostles. So what Saul said was, I'll get in there, I'll take those converts, and I'll make them blaspheme, and I'll kill them, and I'll destroy them. Well, it didn't work. Now then, James is going to try the other thing. James says, now we'll go to the head. We'll go to the big guys. We'll go to the apostles. So he now calls up James, the apostle James. And he puts him to the sword, should mean cut off his head. And when he saw that it pleased the Jews, he proceeded to seize Peter also. Any politics in there? All right, he did one thing. All the Jews loved him for it. So now he goes out and he gets Peter. Boy, if they love me for killing James, think what they'll do with Peter. And those were the days of unleavened bread. And when he had taken him, he put him in prison and delivered him to 4 quaternions of soldiers to guard him. So he put him in jail. Now, it's the days of unleavened bread. What would that have to do with it? Why not just go ahead and kill him? These are holy days for the Jews, and I want to please the Jews, and I'm not going to kill him during their holy days. So I'll wait till this unleavened bread's over, which will be 7 days. And 7 days from now, I'll kill Peter. So he puts him in jail. He puts him in there, and he has 4 quaternions. Now, a quaternion is 4 soldiers. So he has 4 groups of 4 soldiers. Now, you remember those watches that I've told you on the clock? The first watch would be in the evening from 6 to 9. Be 4 soldiers. Then another quaternion would come out from 9 to 12, and they'd watch. And then from 12 to 3, and then from 3 to 6. So you got 4 quaternion of soldiers watching Peter then here, so he won't get away. 5. Peter, therefore, was kept in the prison, but prayer was made earnestly of the church unto God for him. And when Herod was about to bring him forth, now, by the way, the prayers, keep this in mind, prayers made earnestly. They were really praying. So keep that in mind. That's what we would be doing, wouldn't it? We had one of our beloved people in jail, and they were getting ready to kill him. Okay? Now, and Herod was about to bring him forth. The same night, Peter, that he was going to bring him forth the next day. Peter was sleeping between 2 soldiers. So they had him chained to 2 soldiers inside the cell, bound with 2 chains, and guards before the door kept the prison. So they had 2 guards laying in there with him in the cell, chained to him. They had 2 guards standing on the outside of the door, watching the door. And 7, and behold, An angel of the Lord stood by him, and a light shined in the cell, and he smote Peter on the side, and woke him, saying, Rise up quickly. And his chains fell off from his hands. Are these miracles? Sure they are. Chains don't just fall off. And so these chains just fell off. And the angel said unto him, Gird thyself, and bind on the sandals. And he did so. So, get dressed, and put your shoes on. And he did so. And he said unto him, Cast thy garment about thee. Grab your coat. Throw your coat on. So he grabbed his coat and followed him. And he went out and followed, and he knew not that it was true, which was done by the angel, but thought he saw a vision. He thought he was dreaming. He didn't know whether this was true. It sure seemed like it was true. But obviously, these things don't just happen, you know, and you don't make jailbreaks like this. So this must be a vision or a dream of some kind or another. And when they were past the first and second guard, they came to the iron gate that leadeth into the city. So this would be the big fence around the whole prison. And when they got to this iron gate, what did it do? Of its own accord, it opened to them of its own accord. There's your first automatic door. And so it opened to them of its own accord, and they went out and passed on through one street, and straightway the angel departed from him. Now put yourself in Peter's shoes. All these things happening, chains falling off, getting up there, going out past the guards, getting over there, a big iron gate just opens of its own accord. You walk out, you go down one street, down to where there's another street, and all of a sudden the angel that's guarding you just leaves you. And somewhere in the night. How would you feel? Pretty lonesome, huh? You're making a jailbreak, aren't you? What's going to happen to you if you get caught? You're going to get killed. So you're out there, you're making a jailbreak, but you don't know whether you're dreaming. And when Peter was come to himself, when he finally hit his head, I suppose, or whatever you do, when he woke up, when he knew it was real, I'm really out here. This is real. Now I know of a truth that the Lord had sent forth his angel and delivered me out of the hand of Herod and from all the expectation of the people of the Jews. They all thought I'd be put to death. And when he had considered the thing, so he stood there, what should I do? What do you think I ought to do? So he considered it. He came to the house of Mary, the mother of John, whose surname was Mark. Now, this Mark is a young man, and he will be the man that grows up and writes the Gospel of Mark. But there'll be some other things that happens in between with him. So he goes to Mary's house. This is where the church was all gathered together and praying. It said where many were gathered together and were praying. And he knocked at the door of the gate, and a maid came to answer named Rhoda. So they had a big iron fence, a big fence of some kind around the property. It had a gate out there, and he's out there at the gate knocking, rattling the gate, open up, open up. And one of the maids, one of the servants in the house by the name of Rhoda, she came out. And when she knew Peter's voice, she just heard his voice and recognized it. She opened not the gate for joy, but ran in and told that Peter stood before the gate. She was so happy to hear his voice, she didn't even run out and open the gate. She just turned around, ran back in the house and said, Peter's out there, Peter's out there. She's so happy. And you can just think, poor old Peter's still out there shaking that gate. He's wanting to get in. If he gets caught, they're going to kill him. And 15, and they said unto her, you're mad, you're crazy. But she confidently affirmed that it was so. No, it's true, he's out there. And they said, it's his angel. No, he's not there, it must be his angel of some kind. Now, I want to throw this in to kind of give you a little comfort maybe. What were they in there praying for? We've already learned about it, for Peter to be released, isn't it? To save his life. Peter's out there shaking the gate in the middle of the night. They come in and say, Peter's out there. What do they say? No, can't be that. That's not the way we have it visualized. That's not how it's supposed to happen. And so thinking in some other way. Have you ever offered a prayer and asked God to do something that you don't have any idea how God would do it because it's just impossible? You see, this is impossible for Peter to get loose, isn't it? I mean, he's in a jail cell. The door is locked. He has 2 guards chained to each hand. He has 2 guards out at the door. He is inside another house. He then has a fence with an iron gate around it. You don't get loose from something like that. And so God's not answering the prayer the way I thought He would. See? And so you can see the humanity in these people that's in here. Yeah. I don't know. I've never read anything of where the Jews really thought about it, but in those days, they did. The general consensus of humanity is that the spirits of people floated around in the world. And in fact, they called them demons. That's what demons were to those people. It was like that. And to the Gentile world, demons were good. They were the good people that were there. So I suppose it would be associated somehow like that, you know. Maybe he's already got his head cut off and his angel, his head's out there somewhere like that. I don't know. But Peter continued knocking. Poor guy, you just got a feel for him. And when they had opened, they saw him and were amazed. And he beckoned them with his hand to hold their peace, declared unto them how the Lord had brought him out of the prison, and he said, tell these things unto James. Wait a minute. James just been killed. This wouldn't be James the apostle. This would be James, the Lord's brother. All right, James, the Lord's brother, would be there. So I said, now you go tell these to James and to the brethren, and he departed and went to another place. So I've got to get out of here into another place before they come and find me. So I want you to know I'm free, and you go tell him, and away he goes. So we don't know where he went. Now, as soon as it was day, there was no small stir among the soldiers. In the Greek language, when they want to say there's something big, they say it in the negative. There was no little earthquake. What does that mean? There was a big one. There was no small stir. What does that mean? I mean, City Hall and the police department are really upset. Things are really popping downtown. And there was no small stir among the soldiers what was become of Peter. And when Herod had sought for him and found him not, he examined the guards, brought him in, talked to them. Wonder what those poor guys said. You know, I'll bet they said, the two of us was there and we were chained to his hands. We had chains on and we were chained to his arms. And these other guys said, we were standing there at the door watching. There wasn't anybody walked by this door. Don't you bet that's what they said? Because that's what happened. If you were Herod, would you believe him? So he examined them, and then he put them to death. Put them to death. That's what we're going to do to Peter. And if you let a man escape, you have to pay his penalty. So 4 guys got killed that day. 4 guys on his on that ship that was there. And it said, and he went down from Judea to Caesarea and tarried there. So Herod takes off now from Jerusalem to Caesarea. Why would he go to Caesarea? That's his headquarters. A lot of times we get the idea that Jerusalem was his headquarters, but Jerusalem was the holy city to the Jews. Herod was a lover of the Romans. He's up at Caesarea. That's where he had his headquarters. So he left Jerusalem and went down to Caesarea. Why would it say down to Caesarea? That's north. It's elevation. There he went to Caesarea. Okay, when he gets up there, now he was highly displeased with them of Tyre and Sidon. Tyre and Sidon is right along where Phoenicia is, right in there. There are towns in Phoenicia. You remember the maps that we had in there? All right, now he was highly displeased with them. And they came with one accord, and having made Blastus, the king's chamberlain, their friend, now this would mean the house servant, the guy in charge of his house, they made him their friend, and they asked for peace because their country was fed from the king's country. Do people do that to us today? People that hate us? Do they come over and befriend us in order to get money? Well, certainly they do. That's the way that it happens all the time. That's what they were doing. This is foreign aid. they were getting the foreign aid from Herod, and so and Herod was upset at him for some reason, and so they're trying to get back in his good graces. So they're down there, and they want to get back in his good graces. 21. And upon a set day, Herod arrayed himself in royal apparel, and sat on the throne, and made an oration unto them. So he goes out into this amphitheater, and he makes this great oration to them. Now, here's an interesting thing. As you're looking down, there's a picture of the theater, of where he would have been in. There's the outside as you're walking into it. There's the stairs, there are the seats and all that's around it. As you look down there, you're sitting down and you're looking down, and he would be down there on his throne in some way or another. Now that's facing the west. This is a very interesting thing. This is something that just makes your bones tingle when you realize this. This is the only theater in Israel that faces the west. The sun comes up in the east, goes down the west. And so if you have a theater facing this way, the sun's either in the actor's eyes or the sun's in the people's eyes. So they always had them north and south. But they built this one out toward Rome to show the Caesar how much they loved him. So it was out there to show him that. Well, here's the interesting thing, that you got it here. Do you see that sun hitting down there? When you see the sun hitting the floor of that? So he gets up there, and he made a royal, put a royal apparel. Josephus said it was a silver garment. It was woven with silver, just a silver garment. Now, what would a silver garment look like with the sun coming up over the back and coming down and hitting him? What would it look like? I'll never forget standing there and looking at that and having that pointed out and seeing that, and we could see it. You could just see that sparkling, and it just came to life that how this would happen, how the sun would be hitting. See, before that I didn't realize how the sun would be hitting in a theater like that. So he's out there and he's making an oration, and the people shouted, saying, "The voice of a God and not a man." Why would they say that? They're wanting his approval. They're wanting his approval. Now, again, we have to put ourselves back in there. This was an age of where the Caesars were claiming they were gods. They were claiming that divinity, that they were divine, that they were gods, and having big statues and temples built to them. Right behind this amphitheater, there was a great statue of Caesar and a great temple to Caesar. You go in, you worship him, show him what a great God he was, and so forth. And so here's Herod. So can't you see Herod? He's king of this country. And these people are saying the voice of a God and not a man. Can't you see? It'd be like it. It'd be kind of like if somebody gets up to make a speech tomorrow, and back in Washington D.C., and the people yell, "It's not the voice of a congressman, it's the voice of a president." What are they trying to do? They're trying to build him up. And if this congressman accepts that, yeah, you know, I'm worthy of this. So Herod didn't squash this. He let it go. He didn't say anything. And immediately an angel of the Lord smote him, because he gave not God the glory, and he was eaten of worms and gave up the ghost. But the word of God grew and multiplied. Now, Josephus tells us a little bit more about this. There's our guide down there as he was reading this, where I told you your backbone just tingled. So he opens up his New Testament and he says, "Imagine me having on this silver garment, see him standing in the sun." And then he's reading it, the people shouting, "The voice of a God and not a man." Immediately, he was hit in the stomach with all these worms. Now, in this theater, Herod accepted deity for himself and was also welcoming Caesar as a human deity. Right there. And God accepted the challenge by striking him with worms right on the spot. letting him linger for 5 miserable days before taking the life of this human deity, so-called. Right over there is Herod's residence. That's where he lived. And Josephus said they took him from that platform, crying and screaming, took him over to his residence. He laid over there screaming for 3 days. And his screaming was so torturous that people outside could hear it, and they moved him on down away from the crowd for 2 more days, and he died. And you see that, and there it is. My, oh my. How it just makes your bones shiver to see a person that took the glory of God. Well, the Word of God grew and multiplied. That would cause it. And Barnabas and Saul returned from Jerusalem. How did those guys get in there? What do you mean they returned from Jerusalem? They're not even in our story here. When's the last time we saw Barnabas and Saul? Back in chapter 11, wasn't it? Back in chapter 11, they had gone from Antioch down to Judea and back up. Okay. Jerusalem is the last city that they would visited. They went up there, having fulfilled their ministration or the job of taking the money down, taking with them John, whose surname was Mark. Now then we run across Mark again. John, whose surname was Mark. So they take him back. You have any idea about why all the people in the city of Jerusalem, they'd grab this guy? He's Barnabas' cousin. Barnabas' cousin. We'll run across him in just a little while, and he'll play a significant role. Okay, there's where we close.